This is the Sabbath School lesson for the fourth quarter, 2021.
Lesson 10 from our series Present Truth in Deuteronomy is titled Remember, Do Not Forget, ready for teaching on December 4, and I'm Percy Harrold. Thursday, December 2. Remember that you were a slave. Read Deuteronomy 5:15, 6:12, 15:15, 16:3 and 16:12, 24:18 and 24:12. What specifically did the Lord want the people never to forget, and why? Deuteronomy 5:15, And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. And 6:12, Then beware lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And chapter 15, verse 15, You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this thing today. And chapter 16, verse 3, You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it, that is, the bread of affliction, for you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day in which you came out of the land of Egypt, all the days of your life. And chapter 16 and verse 12, And you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. And chapter 14 of Deuteronomy, verses 18, But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this thing. And verse 22, And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. As we have seen, all through the Old Testament, the Lord constantly brought the minds of the people back to the Exodus, their miraculous deliverance by God from Egypt. To this day, thousands of years later, practicing Jews keep the Passover celebration, a memorial to what the Lord has done for them. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be, when your children say to you, What do you mean by this service? That you shall say, It is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households. Exodus 12:25-27. For the church today, the Passover is a symbol of the deliverance we have been offered in Christ. In 1 Corinthians 5:7 we read, For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Read Ephesians 2:8-13. What are these Gentile believers told to remember? How does it parallel what the Hebrews in Deuteronomy were told to remember as well? Ephesians 2, beginning at verse 8, For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Therefore, remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who were called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Paul wanted these people to remember what God had done for them in Christ, what he had saved them from, and what they now had because of God's grace to them. As with the children of Israel, it wasn't anything in and of themselves that commended them to God. Instead, it was only God's grace given to them, even though they were strangers from the covenants of promise, that made them who they were in Christ Jesus. Whether Jews in the wilderness, Christians in Ephesus, or Seventh-day Adventists anywhere in the world, how crucial it is for us always to remember and not forget what God has done for us in Christ. No wonder, then, that we have these words from Desire of Ages, page 83. It would be well for us to spend a thoughtful hour each day in contemplation of the life of Christ. We should take it point by point and let the imagination grasp each scene, especially the closing ones. As we thus dwell upon his great sacrifice for us, our confidence in him will be more constant, our love will be more quickened, and we shall be more deeply imbued with his Spirit. This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.